r/NoSleep. Posted by u/sugar-soad. I keep killing my roommate every night and he wakes up the next morning as if nothing has happened. So I, 36 meters, ended up having to sign a lease and move in with a complete stranger named Adam almost a year ago. Adam, 33 meters, was a bit unusual but we got along okay at the start. He was a bit too strict about chores and would constantly use my belongings without permission. We ended up having a massive argument and I just lashed out in anger and punched him in the face. I remember watching in slow motion as he fell backwards and hit his head off the table. It was very clear that his neck had snapped as it shouldn't bend at that angle. I quickly ran into my room and hid. I didn't think that I would sleep but somehow I drifted off. I awoke the next morning and was terrified to walk out of my room as I knew what awaited me. I eventually plucked up the courage and let out a scream as I saw him sitting at the kitchen table eating his breakfast. He looked at me confused and asked if I was okay. I just stood there with my mouth agape until he finally left the apartment. I convinced myself that what happened was all a dream as it was the only explanation. That night when he came home we ended up talking about some random stuff and actually enjoying each other's company for the first time. I found out we had a lot of common interests. We opened a bottle of whiskey that I had gotten as a bonus from work and started drinking away. I got a bit too drunk and decided to try something out. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed the sharpest knife we had. I could see the shock on Adam's face as I plunged the knife into his chest repeatedly. I will admit that I got a bit carried away and stabbed him over 100 times. I walked to my bedroom and couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. I woke up the next day and yet again Adam was fine. I realized that I could live out my deepest darkest fantasies and no one would ever know. Every night I watched the life leave his body as I used another method to kill him. It became like a ritual that I did just before I went to sleep. Imagine every depraved act you have ever wanted to commit against someone. Well, I inflicted them all on him. I honestly never thought of myself as a sadistic person but I knew there would be no consequence for me. The most fun one was when I ran a lawnmower across his body and watched as his screams were cut off as his face was ripped open. I came home one evening and decided to take the night off from killing him, as I was exhausted after a long day of work. I sat down on the couch and just tried to relax. I could see that Adam was giving me a few weird looks but just ignored him. I saw him shrug before walking away into the kitchen. I had forgotten about him until I felt him stab a fork into my eye. I began to scream in pain as Adam said, "I guess it is my turn now," before running a knife across my neck. I screamed myself awake the next morning and ran to the mirror to find no trace of the injuries that I had incurred the previous night. Adam smiled at me when I walked out of my room and said he hoped I had a good night's sleep. I ended up moving out of that apartment the following weekend as I couldn't sleep while he was nearby. I thought of everything I had done to him and lived in fear that he would do something similar. This is why I have lived on my own since, as you never know what your roommates are capable of. The next story of this video. Posted by u/Shane, star 93. I found something unimaginable while cleaning out my dad's house. Let me start by saying my father isn't dead. At least I don't think so. But I can see how the title might lead you to think that he is. To avoid confusing you any more than you probably already are, let me start at the beginning. My dad and I have had a pretty strong relationship. Ever since I was a child he was always very supportive of me, putting up with my rebellious phase and even allowing me to stay at home during those years of financial uncertainty we all face after graduating from college. Despite repeated calls for him to move in with me after Mom died a few years ago, he insisted he wanted to remain living out his days there. He was getting older and years of cigarettes and fast food were finally beginning to catch up with him. Being as close as I was to him, it really pained me to see his health failing the way it was. His glassy eyes a parody of the once intimidating stare he would give me when I misbehaved. Eventually I got a call from him a few days ago asking to stay with me for a while. He explained that after a recent fall in the bathroom his doctor recommended he stay with someone until he felt well enough to return home. Despite being almost 70, he had a lot of pride and insisted on not being a burden, so I was a bit surprised that he took his doctor's advice and relented in taking up my offer. Needless to say, he didn't need to ask twice. I even offered to pick him up at home but insisted on taking the bus over to my apartment to prove he ain't no baby, as he would often repeat. My apartment is in walking distance to the bus stop, so we caught up during the walk. He didn't have much going on. In typical dad fashion, he waxed light about gas prices, his annoyance with the new diet his doctor set for him, and his idea to get a dachshund puppy simply because he liked saying the word dachshund. I work in advertising, so most of my working hours is at home staring at my laptop screen, so I got to prepare meals and spend more time with him. Everything was going well for us, I was even contemplating how I should ask him to stay for good instead of returning to the old house. That was until the second night. In my job I'm often required to meet and discuss new projects with overseas partners and branches, which requires me to be awake to accommodate those in different time zones. It might have been around 2 a.m. when my semi-conscious brain picked up on it through the headphones attached to the computer. At first I thought it might have been something from one of the other speakers on the Zoom call, but I realized no one else seemed bothered by it. Then I heard it again, this time louder. It was coming from the guest bedroom where Dad was supposed to be sleeping. As I got closer to the door I heard it even clearer. Why can't I see him then? The voice was old, much older than my father. If I had to chance a guess, the person that voice belonged to might have easily been pushing 100. Hoarse and rough like sandpaper, it was nothing like the sleepy, Midwestern drawl of my dad's voice. Confused and a bit concerned I cracked the door to peep inside, only to see my dad snoring away under the quilt. At first it occurred to me that he could be pretend sleeping, but even if he was, what was the alternative? After standing in a dark bedroom, staring at my elderly dad sleep for about 3 minutes, I eventually chalked it up to my imagination playing tricks on me. It wasn't a very satisfactory answer, but it was the only one I had. The next day pretty much went as expected. Dad ate his breakfast while I ran some errands. I considered asking him about the strange voice the night before, but eventually decided against it. I didn't want to give him the impression that I was hearing things or spying on him. That definitely wouldn't help my chances of him staying. I kept it to myself and convinced myself again that it was just my imagination running wild combined with lack of sleep. Until the second night. I was focusing on a PowerPoint presentation when I saw a shadow pass my door in the corridor outside my room. Naturally I would have thought it was Dad's going to use the toilet or grab a snack in the kitchen, except the shape of the figure that passed the door was much shorter. Dad is at least 5'10", this shadow was for the most part half the length of the doorway itself. I was wide awake this time. I paused before peeping around the corner in time to see my father. No. Not my father. My father. A miniature, child-sized version of him walking away from me. Same clothing he wore to bed a few hours ago, same thin, silvery strands of hair at the back of his head, walking away towards the bedroom. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I still can't understand what I am typing here. Eventually, after about 30 minutes of intense debate in my mind, I decided to open the door of the guest room and see for myself. There he lay, my dad, regular height and proportions, fast asleep. I must have stood there for about an hour staring at him snore and drool into his pillow before finding the courage to head to bed. It was hardly a restful night. Everything from extremely early onset of Alzheimer's to overwork and stress crossed my mind. As usual, everything was normal as ever the following morning. Dad plunked down in front of the television complaining about CNN, while I studied him from across the room over a cup of coffee. I wish I could tell you I saw his skin quiver like a costume or a second pair of eyes blink to give away some sinister alien form, but I would be lying if I did. The man muttering about politics in the couch in front of me was the same man who taught me about life and provided for me all those years ago. Most fears and jitters tend to seem ridiculous when the sun comes out, and this one was no different. I eventually overcame any initial apprehension and spoke with him about his night. It was restful with the exception of some mild headaches, but it eventually passed. Eventually he told me there was some medication at home he was supposed to be taking but forgot to bring with him. After a brief scolding from me on how to be more responsible, I agreed to run back to his house and grab it for him. I was happy to be out for a while. It gave me an opportunity to clear my head from work and put things in perspective. I got to the house I spent my childhood and saw the front yard covered in high grass and weeds. Because of Dad's health issues and the fact that he was at my place for the past 3 days, I didn't exactly expect a rose garden with a topiary lawn, but this was insane. From the looks of it, the yard wasn't tended to for at least 2 months. I walked past the mini Amazon jungle in front of my childhood home and used the key to unlock the weather-beaten brown door that was once beige, and the stench hit me almost immediately. Putrid and foul. I've read books that say the scent of a rotting corpse has a sweet undertone, but let me tell you, there was none of that in this situation. It was a raw, meaty smell that stimulates your most primal reflex to run. Laid out on the floor of the living room was the decomposing body of my father. Eyes bulging, head twisted perfectly around. I felt sick. My empty stomach turned. It turned from the foul stench, it turned from the dead body of my father, it turned from the fact that I don't know who or what is in my house right now. I need help.